My sexual fantasy is if I'm going to kill a victim or do something to a victim is have them bound and tied. Um, Now, somewhere along the line, in my dreams, I have what they call torture chambers, and to relieve your sexual fantasies, you have to go to the kill.
Once again, it's Murder and Mayhem Monday. Welcome back. My name is Franklin James, the serial author, and I hope you guys have a great week, or at least try to. Now, today I want to talk about the chilling case of Dennis Rader, better known as BTK, an acronym which stands for Bind, Torture, Kill. It's a nickname he gave himself, which tells me in some twisted way he's looking for attention and notoriety. But why did Dennis Rader choose to become BTK? Why would a seemingly ordinary man who was a husband, father, and a church leader live a double life? How does someone like Dennis Rader become the personification of calculated evil? Well, today I'll unpack his story, peeling back the layers of his childhood, adulthood, and the disturbing factors that shaped him into one of history's most infamous serial killers. Now let's get into it. All right. To better understand Dennis Rader, we must first start at the beginning, his childhood. He was born in Wichita, Kansas in 1945, and he was the eldest of four brothers. Outwardly, his family life appeared stable. They were hardworking and they were churchgoers. Yet beneath the surface, Dennis Rader experienced significant emotional neglect. His parents, especially his mother, were distant, leaving Dennis feeling invisible, a theme he would later echo in his adult life. And from what I know, feeling neglected during one's formative years can have a profound effect on a child's sense of self-worth. Now, in Rader's case, this neglect and abandonment likely contributed to feelings of inadequacy and rejection. Thus, as a young boy, he developed the need to assert control and dominance to combat this inner void. He likely felt helpless and vulnerable, and this manifested in what psychologists call the McDonald Triad, a trio of behaviors often linked to future violent tendencies. Behaviors such as fire setting, bedwetting, and animal cruelty. Now, the McDonald Triad was introduced in the 1960s, and it's a little controversial, right? I mean, from what we know now, there's a lot to examine when it comes to identifying a serial killer. And yet, for Dennis Rader, it was his treatment of animals that stood out. He admitted to torturing and killing small animals, which is an early sign of his sadistic tendencies. And he also admitted that he found torturing and killing those small animals sexually gratifying. He was aroused.
I did start to abuse farm cats. I built a box and I cut out the top of it just for a cat head. And then I get some milk. And wait till one would get in there. And I pull the string, the box to drop over. So I stick its head up through the hole. And I had a noose for it.
Why did you like hanging cats?
There was some sexual excitement there to see them hung.
Which is something you don't typically hear. But then it raises the question of why. Why did he find what he was doing so pleasurable? I mean, I know he tortured and killed those small animals because it allowed him to feel powerful and in control. He was asserting his dominance because he was a kid who felt helpless, vulnerable, and abandoned. But I think something else must have happened to him as a child, like an event or a traumatic experience that caused him to link sexual pleasure with watching animals in distress, suffering, and then later on in life wanting people to suffer in the same manner as well. I mean, you just don't wake up wanting to experience these things, especially as a kid. But he did mention that when he was a kid, he saw his mother in distress, and she was in fear. She got her finger stuck in a spring while she was cleaning the sofa. He mentioned how the look of helplessness and fear on his mother's face stirred something up inside of him, and he enjoyed it. I mean, he witnessed an adult with power and authority be subdued, and he liked it.
My mom, she was vacuuming the living room, and under one of the sofas, she got the ring caught in one of the springs, and she couldn't reach it with her other hand. She was hurting, so she asked me to go for help. That image of her being in terror and kind of held is prolonged me into one of my dark side.
And perhaps feeling abandoned or rejected by his mother fueled his dark desires and fantasies even more. But that sort of mindset has to come from somewhere, and unfortunately, he couldn't let it go. And that's why he began chasing that thrill and wanting to witness that look of terror and helplessness on the faces of his victims, like an addict always chasing a high. Now, as Dennis Rader entered adulthood, the seeds of his pathology began to sprout. In his early 20s, Dennis Rader joined the Air Force. It was a move many assumed was about discipline, duty, and service. But for Dennis Rader, it was another way to gain control over his life and others. Structure and authority gave him a sense of purpose, which he never felt growing up. Yet behind the uniform, his mind was already being consumed by violent fantasies. He later admitted to fantasizing about tying up women and torturing them, fantasies that would escalate to murder. Dennis Rader was sexually compelled, and his fantasies are what forensic psychologists call paraphilic disorders. And Rader's particular paraphilia revolved around power, domination, and humiliation. He loved watching and studying his victims in their everyday lives. He was stalking them. He was creating this sick fantasy inside of his head. And in 1974, he began acting on these fantasies. His first known victims were the Otero family, 4 innocent people, including 2 children. He said he picked them at random, but it was only supposed to be the mother and the daughter. But what drove him to do it was the fact that his life was becoming undone, which sounds like he was looking for some sort of control and to feel powerful. And he wanted to lean on his dark fantasies, and killing that poor family gave him that. But he also wanted to instill fear and gain notoriety. Now, what's also chilling is how calculated Dennis Rader was. He was very organized. He didn't kill out of blind rage. He planned his offenses meticulously, and he did this by studying his victims and their routines. In fact, he referred to his victims as projects, and he even had nicknames for them like Project Blackout. What's even crazier is he had a list of names on a sheet of paper, a list of women that he wanted to torture and kill. But from what I've gathered, he turned his victims into projects as a way to dehumanize them, to distance himself emotionally. He didn't see them as people anymore. It also allowed him to justify his actions. He had projects that needed to be taken care of, and he didn't think about anything or anyone else. Dennis Rader was goal-oriented. I mean, the level of premeditation indicates psychopathy, characterized by a lack of empathy, superficial charm, and a manipulative nature. And then there was something known as motel parties. Now, this is when he would travel out of town for work, find a motel, and then end up dressing up in women's clothing. And often it would be the clothing of his victims. So he would take trophies. And he had these motel parties because he wanted to relive the experience of what he did to those victims and imagine himself as a victim, tied up, terrified, and feeling helpless, completely afraid. These motel parties were autoerotic, and he got off on his sick and twisted role play.
The only time I had to do anything would be out of town. That's when the motel parties started. I'd work up a sexy frizzy by doing bondage. A lot of times I'd have pictures of the girls and go through that, lay them out.
Now, he did admit that if it weren't for these motel parties, there would probably be more victims. Although it's been speculated there probably are. Now, here's where the duality of Dennis Rader becomes even more disturbing. While committing these heinous crimes, he led an outwardly normal life. He was married, raised 2 children, and was an active member of his church. He even served as a Boy Scout leader. Forensic psychologists often refer to this as compartmentalization, but Dennis Rader referred to it as cubing because a cube has different sides to it. Thus, he saw himself possessing different sides: the loving husband and father, the active churchgoer, the scout leader, and the sadistic killer lurking in the shadows. The part of him that he called Factor X. Sort of like how Ted Bundy said he was influenced by the entity.
Factor X is an overall drive. Even today, if I see something on TV or a picture or start thinking about the old times and fantasy, I still get that feeling, that sexual feeling. I really do. I can't, it's just still there.
And these were personas that were created that allowed them to do whatever they wanted to without remorse. They weren't responsible for what they were doing. The personas were at fault. It allowed them to justify their actions. Now, was Dennis Rader suffering from some dissociative disorder? Perhaps. I mean, these things do happen, but who knows, right? Psychopaths are often clever and manipulative. They'll do and say anything to try to humanize themselves. But what I do know is that BTK's ability to separate his violent, sadistic side from his public persona allowed him to evade suspicion for decades. And it also speaks to his grandiosity. He believed that he was smarter than everyone else, capable of fooling the world. But, like many serial killers, Dennis Rader couldn't resist the urge to taunt law enforcement. He even referred to it as a game of cat and mouse. He sent letters to the police and media, detailing his crimes and mocking their inability to catch him. And these letters gave him a sense of power and recognition, fulfilling that need for attention that plagued him since childhood. And ironically, it was that need for recognition that led to his downfall, his capture. In 2004, after years of silence, he resumed his communication with the police. He sent them a floppy disk and he thought it was untraceable. Forensic experts quickly linked the disk to Rader's church computer. When confronted, Dennis Rader confessed in chilling detail without remorse, and his language lacked emotional dimension. He described the murders as if recounting a mundane day at the office, and this detachment is a classic form of psychopathy. For Dennis Rader, the victims weren't people. They were objects or props in his twisted fantasies. Now, in the end, Dennis Rader's case is a sobering reminder of the complexity of the human mind. It forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about the interplay between nature, nurture, and personal choice. And it provides us with an opportunity to examine how an unsuspecting, unassuming husband, father, church member, and scout leader could become a cold-blooded killer known as BTK. But I want to thank you guys for tuning in. And I do ask that you stab that like button and subscribe. Leave a comment and let me know what you think about the BTK Killer. Share this video out there, smash that bell for notifications, and if possible, avoid mayhem.